As you and your team are working through your project, your stakeholders are going to want some regular updates on how things are progressing. They'll want to know what is the percentage complete on the project. They'll want to know whether you're over budget or under budget, whether or not you're going to finish on time. They'll want to know how much is this project going to end up costing us by the time that it's finished. If there's no real good measuring system in place, that's where you'll see status reports going out that are more like ballpark guesses. That may be fine on a very small project. But if the project has any sort of investment riding on it, if there's any major business decisions that need to be made based on how the project is progressing, then you'll want to make sure that you have a very good system in place so that the measurements and the estimates that you're putting out on your report are grounded in reality and that they can be justified. All right, let's take a look at Earned Value Management, or EVM. This is a widely accepted standard framework for project calculations. They're easy to understand and easy to explain to your project stakeholders. If you're looking for a textbook definition on EVM, take a look at the Project Management Body of Knowledge. For our purposes, Earned Value Management is simply a project status measuring tool. This is a framework that's going to help us measure what's been done in your project compared to what you plan to do. With those measurements, you can answer questions like whether the project has accomplished enough or whether it's on budget. To understand Earned Value Management, you'll need to appreciate that the value of the project is equal to its budgeted cost. We'll explain that more in a moment. For now, let's start off with a very basic schedule, laid out as a Gantt chart or a visual time flow. This project timeline has just 5 tasks: planning, requirement gathering, development, quality and testing, and transition to business. Really, in a real project, you're going to identify tasks with a lot more granularity. But for learning purposes, let's just keep it simple. If we know the resources that are required for a task and you know the cost of those resources, then we can assign costs for completing those tasks. Look at the task called planning. Let's say that to complete the planning stage, you're going to need 2 analysts working full-time and they cost the business a hefty $100 an hour. We need to assign resource costs to all of those tasks. If we think that the planning task is going to take us about 2 months or 44 working days, we can come up with the resource cost of completing our task. In this example, it's $70,400. Now again, realistically, you're going to break down a work package like planning into much smaller chunks, tasks and deliverables that maybe take a day or so to complete. But you could assign costs at a high level like this too. Anyway, understanding the anticipated effort allows us to complete the human resource cost per task or per stage, whichever. In our example, now we have human resource costs associated with each task. Resource effort costs are high on any project. In knowledge work fields, they're probably going to be the biggest cost that you have. And in some cases, they may even be the only cost that you track. In our example project though, let's add in a few more costs. Let's say we have software costs and travel costs. In a really detailed project schedule, you could assign these extra costs to very specific work packages, or you could assign them to a higher level stage like what we have here. They should be contained though and linked to a particular stage or to a particular task. If you have any costs that are going to run for the whole project, like renting a physical space for the team, then break up that cost by the project phase or stage. Now that we've added the human resource costs and other project costs, we have a whole cost associated with each task in our project plan. Now let's get back to that main idea of earned value management, that budgeted cost equals your value. Some people resist EVM because they misunderstand this principle. They argue that the value has to be greater than the cost, otherwise the project would have no return on investment. So let's explain this. When we say that the cost and the value are the same thing, what we're really saying is that the project plan and its budget were approved by a sponsor, so it has a sticker value. If the sponsor approved a $10,000 project, then that sponsor is buying a set of tasks and deliverables that are worth $10,000. If it actually cost $9,000 or actually cost $11,000, that doesn't change the value of what was ordered and delivered, a $10,000 project. In the same way, taking more or less time doesn't principally change the value of what was delivered. A related key concept in EVM is that the plan becomes your baseline, and all of your comparative analysis must be done against the original plan. Dates and costs might change over time, but all of those realities will need to be compared to your original approved project plan. All right, let's get into our calculations. The first one is pretty simple. Budget at completion. That's the total approved budgeted cost. It's the only calculation where the answer is going to remain static. It doesn't change throughout the whole project. Budget at completion, or BAC, will be the same on day one as it is when the project closes out, regardless of the actual costs that are incurred. All of the other calculations in EVM are designed to help us understand where we are at a given point. So in our example, now it's March 1st. Let's see, what did we plan to have accomplished by this point? Well, we planned that we were going to have the planning stage completed. And we planned that we would have about a third of the requirement stage completed. We did not plan to have anything else started by this point. The value of what we had planned to complete then is 100% of the value or budgeted cost of the planning stage, and 33% of the value or budgeted cost of the requirement gathering stage, but 0% of the value for any of the remaining stages. The planned value then is $122,672. All right, let's tuck that away for a moment and look at what did we actually accomplish. Let's say that in reality, we completed 90% of the planning effort instead of the 100% that we wanted to do. Now, how could you arrive at 90%? The project plan here is overly simple, but in reality, your tasks are going to be broken down much further, often to the level of deliverables, things like create the project communication plan. At that level of detail, it's way easier to get an accurate percent complete, and generally you'll be able to get that from the people who are actually doing the work. Let's say that my planning was actually broken out into 22 tasks, and each one took a couple of days to perform. Then it should be a simple matter of taking inventory of which tasks were completed. The more tasks that your work breakdown structure is broken down into, the more accurate this estimate is going to be at the stage level. In the requirement stage, we estimated that we're about 75% complete, even though we've only used a third of the allotted time. Things seem to be going really well. And although we hadn't planned on starting any of the development, we actually got a head start, and we think we're about 15% done. The total dollar value of those percentages complete is our earned value. In this case, 90% of our planning budget, 75% of our requirements budget, and 15% of our development budget. That's $218,130. The earned value, or EV, represents not what we planned, but what we actually accomplished to date. All right, park earned value now and look at another important calculation. What have we actually spent so far? In this case, let's say the planning phase costed us $85,000. Maybe because there was overtime, or there was higher rates than we budgeted. If an assumption around the budget proved to be false, this still doesn't change the value of the task, remember? For example, what if we found that the analyst billing rate was actually 10% higher than what we planned? This might cause us to go over budget, but the actual value of the task doesn't change. In most projects, you're going to work within a contingency, or your project sponsor will establish how much deviation is acceptable. If the matter is substantial, a change control process should be used. That would alter the planned cost and the value of the project. But do this only if it's really necessary, or else tracking your costs against your plan is going to become really difficult. The requirement gathering phase has only cost us $65,000. Although that is more than the 33% of the planned value for March 1st, that's a bargain considering that the stage is 75% complete. Development has cost us $110,000. So why should that concern you? Well, because it's half the budget, and yet it's only 15% complete. So these figures should prompt some kind of investigation on your part. Why are the costs so much higher than we planned for at this point in time? Maybe the software costs that are associated with this stage were all incurred at once at the start of the phase. You should dig around and find out what's up. Another note about actual costs. Resources will not usually charge their hours by project stage. And since stages overlap, it's not always going to be possible or even necessary for a project manager to track their costs by stage. The actual cost, or the AC calculation, can be done by totaling up all of your paid project invoices. A project manager is going to need to determine if it's necessary or not to track costs by stage or task, or just to keep a sum total. But any of these is going to be sufficient for earned value management calculations. The next calculation is estimate to complete. How much is it going to cost to finish the project from where we're at right now? Since we know that the planning stage is 90% complete, then the cost to complete it has to be the cost of the remaining 10%. Since the value of the planning phase is $70,400, then the estimate to complete that is going to be $7,040. But wait a minute, we've already spent $85,000 on planning. Doesn't it stand to reason that the remaining 10% is going to cost more than $7,040? Really, that depends on a few underlying factors. And a good project manager is going to have to use some kind of discretion here. The earned value management technique, though, is to base your estimate to complete, or ETC, on value. That is, the dollar value of what is left to complete. These 5 tally calculations are really important in EVM. Not only do they provide good information on their own, but they're also going to be used to create the next level of calculations. Those secondary calculations help us to make some predictions around the project outcomes. First, let's look at estimate at completion, or EAC. This is a calculation of what the project is going to have spent by the time it's over. In EVM, it's simply the amount that we've already spent plus the remaining value of the project. That's pretty straightforward, but sometimes it can feel wrong. If there's a strong trend in the project that has not yet been corrected, you may get the feeling that the actual cost of the remaining value is going to be more than what you budgeted. So in some situations, a project manager will create estimates using the CPI, or Cost Performance Index. The Cost Performance Index is a ratio that answers the question, how much value am I actually getting for every dollar spent? Let's take a look. Earned value over actual cost, in this example, gives us 0.84. So in this project, we're getting 84 cents of value for every dollar that we spend. Right away, we can tell this is not good. CPI may be a good indicator of what's to come if the current trends continue. And that's why it sometimes can be used to estimate how much the project will cost by dividing the BAC into it. In this project, if we divided BAC into the CPI, we would get a figure that's about $100,000 higher than the EAC, or estimate at complete, using the typical EVM formula. So you can see right away that there's a standard formula in earned value management for calculating the estimate at completion, but the project manager is going to need to use some kind of discretion when publishing this calculation. The PM is going to have to carefully weigh whether past performance is indicative of future performance. Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, is another useful ratio. Earned value over planned value. This answers the question, how much am I actually accomplishing compared to what I had planned to accomplish by this point in time? In our case, our ratio is 1.78. Higher than 1 is good, lower than 1 is bad. So overall, we can tell that we're ahead of schedule. In our example, planning is behind budget, so the project manager could be excused for wondering whether he or she is actually on schedule or not. The SPI might reassure him that things are moving along. But a word of caution here. Some might be tempted to use the ratio to predict how early or how late the project might finish if the ratio holds. Mathematically, that looks like it makes sense. Our example project is a little more than a year long. Let's call it 250 working days. You might be tempted to divide 250 by 1.78 and then think that the project should be done in 140 days instead of 250. But don't confuse duration with effort. The ratio is not a calculation of length or duration, it's a calculation of earned value versus planned value. And all of that is driven by effort and other costs. So if you have any peaks or valleys in your project effort, or if you have any big one-time costs, like the software costs in this example, then using SPI for a quick and dirty calendar estimate is going to be really misleading. Also, remember that when the project ends, the earned value and the planned value will be the same, and the ratio will be 1.0. If the project is not finished by its approved end date, when earned value and planned value are supposed to be the same, then your schedule performance index is not going to be very meaningful. And it's better to rely only on the project completion percentage at that point. Project complete is a really standard project metric. Whether you use earned value management or not, stakeholders are always going to want to know what is your project complete percent. The EVM calculation for project completion is actual cost divided by estimate at complete, or how much have I spent compared to what I think I will have spent by the end. So why is percentage complete based on spending? Well, that's because spending reflects the value. There is a different approach that you could use for calculating out your percentage complete. Earned value divided by budget at completion, or EV over BAC, to represent the value of the work performed compared to the original plan. In other words, how much have I done versus how much do I plan to do? My personal preference is to base percentage complete on value, as in EV divided by BAC. If you're writing a test, the cost approach is the correct solution. In real life, just pick one and stick to it. The next set of calculations are variances. These tell us how far off the baseline we actually are. Subtracting the planned value from the earned value will give us our schedule variance. In this example, our variance is a positive number. We're about $95,000 worth ahead of schedule. Subtracting the actual cost from the earned value will give us our cost variance, which tells us how much we're currently over or under budget. In our example, the variance is a negative number. Negative variances are bad, we're over budget. It'd be good practice for a sponsor to establish variance thresholds with the project manager. For example, the plan could state that if you're more than, say, $50,000 over budget, any new costs are going to have to be individually pre-approved. So this brings us through the basic earned value management calculations. What can we determine about the health of this project from the numbers and ratios that we've calculated? And do these numbers provide any clues about the next steps that the project manager should take? Let's review. First off, take a look at the red numbers. The cost variance is telling you that we're about $42,000 over budget. The estimate at complete implies that the project overrun is not going to get much worse than that. You should take a closer look at the spending and see if that's really true. Are you over budget because of a one-time cost? Or does the cost performance index represent a trend? And is that going to continue throughout the project? You need to find and repair the damage. But look at the green numbers. Your schedule performance index tells you that you're moving along at a good pace. And your schedule variance shows that you're about $95,000 worth ahead of schedule. In total, you're about 34% done. So what can you do with a project that's ahead of schedule but over budget? Take a look at your project costs. Are there any costs that you're incurring in order to save time? This would be a good time to examine these. See if instead you can spend a little extra time in order to save money. If the situation were reversed, let's say you were under budget but over schedule, that would be a time to judge whether you could buy resources that could help you to get back on schedule. For example, getting contract staff to come in and help out. Most projects, again, aren't as simple as the one we reviewed. And there's some that start off simple and they get more complex as activities need to be shifted around for one reason or another. Imagine your project schedule is a bowl of spaghetti like this, and you have a bunch of activities that should have been done but aren't, and you have other activities that are way ahead of schedule. Are you behind or are you ahead of schedule? Without earned value management, the project manager wouldn't have a satisfactory answer. He might stammer and say, well, I don't know, a little of both? But EVM allows the team to understand the value of each task and compare your overall progress against a baseline. In this way, you can summarize the most complex projects and give a really good picture of the overall project health. Earned value management is a great project management tool, but it has its limitations. Don't let it fool you into thinking that it's the complete project management toolkit. It's not a standalone strategy. EVM, for instance, will not help you to understand the critical path, so you can't rely on it to ensure that the team is working on the correct tasks at the correct time. It also should not be used to calculate how much duration you have left in your project. There are better strategies for that. EVM does not help you to understand your return on investment. It tells you if the project is performing under budget, but not whether the investment of the project itself was a sound one. EVM indicates how you're progressing on the project, but it doesn't indicate if you're doing the right things or if you're doing things right. Having great project metrics doesn't usually help you to determine whether you're delivering with quality. I hope you've benefited from this presentation on earned value management. As you apply the concepts in your organization, don't be surprised to face some challenges. How are you going to marry up earned value management with your company's own project methodology? How do you translate the calculations into action plans? How can you help your sponsors or other staff to accept earned value as a measurement standard? If your project team or company would benefit from a personalized workshop on any of these topics, go to www.alexanderconsulting.ca. There you'll find information on our training and seminar offerings and other useful resources. All the best on your project, and let us know if these tools have been helpful for you.